Today we are making one of the hardest Friday Night Funkin mods out there, and I'm taking you along with every step of the ride. There's an all-star team on board whose members have contributed to a ton of other amazing mods. So let's get going. I love hard video game challenges. Now, I may not always be able to clear them, but I've always been fascinated by absolutely brutal challenges in games. Heck, some of these end up becoming videos on my channel even. And although I focus on Nintendo games on this channel, that wasn't always the case. I actually covered a lot of indie titles in the past. Even though I'm viewed as a Nintendo guy, I've always been fascinated by games like Five Nights at Freddy's, Undertale, and many others. Besides the lore, these games had an amazing appeal as YouTube videos. I loved watching Markiplier, 8-Bit Gaming, Dawko, and many others tackle absurd challenges in some of the Five Nights at Freddy's bonus nights, or even people taking on the Sans genocide fights in Undertale. You wanted to root for the player as they took on an ordeal that you may have failed yourself, and it was satisfying watching them clear it with your support. But rhythm games, that's an entirely different beast, and Friday Night Funkin opened up a whole new world of modding. So of course, I decided to do what I do best, develop some sort of absurd challenge for players to overcome, and the result was Foolhardy. So it comes to no surprise that I'm always tinkering with Nintendo games and altering them in some way to show off their quirks. And indie games aren't really much different. So I set out to make one of the hardest, but still enjoyable, songs for Friday Night Funkin. And this honestly would have not been possible without the help of K-Dev, Rosebud, and Starny Art. Together with their talents and my animation skill set, over the course of a few weeks we pulled it together. So for those of you interested in game development, you might find this process kinda neat. So to pull this off, there are really a few key parts: the concept, the programming and charting, the music, and the art. As you can imagine, some of these things can't be pulled off without the other. So to start off all of this, I actually got the art in motion first. Starny Art was a pleasure to work with, and I highly recommend checking out her work, as she did an amazing job on the artwork. Now, in order to get the artwork done, you need a concept. And if I was going to be making a difficult challenge, it made sense just to lead with my own character instead of reinventing the wheel. My video game, Zardy's Maze, was a difficult horror game after all, full of many hard challenges, so the main antagonist Zardy seemed fitting for a musical debut. The other reason why I decided to move forward with this character was because of the horror aesthetic. I wanted to go for almost like a black metal type song that was a bit spooky. Think like Dimmy Borgir meets Agretsuko, but with the longevity and timeliness of dragon forces through the fire and flames. You may not know any of those things, or you may know all of them, but basically heavy metal plus cute aesthetic plus crazy fast notes. If you've never watched someone play Through the Fire and Flames on Guitar Hero 3 on the highest difficulty, I highly recommend doing it on YouTube. So we got Zardy, our spooky scarecrow, who normally haunts a corn maze and tries to kill you, now waging war on the mic with you. When working with Starny Art, I basically drafted out some super simple pose outlines for her to follow. She already had the perfect art aesthetic for the toon look of Friday Night Funkin. Now Zardy normally uses a garden hoe as a weapon that alerts you of its presence in the game. So for this, I pitched the idea of turning his garden hoe into a mic stand. And well, the rest was history. Starny sketched out each pose, and with some tweaking, we had a fully rendered character. Now on the technical side, Friday Night Funkin uses sprite sheets to basically animate all its characters. You have an idle pose, then a pose for up, down, left, and right. So there's artwork for 5 poses, and from those poses, you can then render out additional frames that serve as the animation for the character. So for Zardy, every pose has 3 frames, and in each frame, I took the existing artwork and animated it. If you draw your character in layers, it's way easier to animate since you can move each individual part. I'd exaggerate certain parts of the character and move the other parts sequentially so that each frame advanced after the other. When played back quickly, it gave the sense of screaming/shouting, which fits perfectly with the heavy metal inspiration we were going for. Now the character is only part of the process. You need a scene too. So we just leveraged the existing landscape for my game. This too was designed in layers so that I could animate it for the mod. You have several layers: grass, a fence, dirt, 3 rows of corn in the cornfield, the sky, moon, clouds, and stars. And a good old sign to mark this dastardly place. Friday Night Funkin animation runs at 24 frames per second. So I actually animated a 24 frame loop of the corn blowing in the wind. 12 frames to swap to the right, and 12 frames to swap back. I then animated all the other elements in the scene. The idea was to double or triple frames up for development so that the loop looked less fluid and clean. So 23 PNG images of a 2560 by 1440 background. This is done because frame 23 leads back to frame 1's position to start the cycle over. Both the character art and the background art can then be used with Adobe Animate to generate a sprite sheet with its own XML file. And these XML files contain references to which specific frames are within and how big the actual frame is out of the whole sprite sheet. This is then used in the game. So, as all this art was being developed, Rosebud, the musical genius on the project, started crafting the impressive song that this entire challenge was based on. It was fast-paced, dark, and eerie sounding, but most importantly, it was an absolute banger. Honestly, it's so good. But how does it work? So, Friday Night Funkin' basically uses 2 tracks for every song. You have the instrumental track and then the vocal track. The vocal track is overlaid on top of the instrumental track, and every note in the vocal audio files is tied to your key inputs. So if you hit a note, Boyfriend will sing. But if you miss a note, that note will be skipped in the song. Honestly, a lot of inspiration was derived from the feeling and progression that Through the Fire and Flames instilled in the player back in those early Guitar Hero days. The idea that the song scales in difficulty and ultimately prepares you for the grand finale at the end. You'll need some quick fingers to be able to match Zardy's screaming frenzy at this point in the song. We sampled a lot of different voices for Zardy, from utilizing metal scraping sounds to even bear noises, but ultimately a lot of them didn't work. Rosebud eventually crafted a voice that worked perfectly for scaling notes, and the rest was history. Which brings us to the final section, the programming and the charting. So next up was K-Dev to work his magic. Cade was one of the mad lads behind Whitty, and you can thank him for charting that madness for Ballistic. So when I say charting, I'm basically referring to mapping out all the keystrokes needed for the vocal track notes. Each of these needs to be placed and timed out. Cade explained that every key in the game has a 10-frame input window, which is pretty forgiving for rhythm games. Depending on what frame you input the key on will rate you on your key press and affect your score. Now, Cade actually developed his own engine for making the modding process a lot easier. It's pretty robust, so I recommend checking it out. But the process of charting vocals is still a long and tedious process, especially when a song is fast, because there can be hundreds of notes, if not 1,000. You'll basically be replaying sections over and over again to get the timing right, and to assign keys to those specific notes. And at almost 4 minutes long with a BPM of 200, it's a long trek. But Cade charted it beautifully. And with the art in place, the song Foolhardy was complete. Throw on some health icons and menu graphics, and that is how we made one of the hardest challenges to date for Friday Night Funkin'. This Zardy's a bit different than the one that hunts you down in the dark, but I'm really curious if you can overcome the challenge in Friday Night Funkin'. Even if you can't, the music is a banger, so check it out in the description below. A huge shout out to K-Dev for programming this mod, so please check out their YouTube channel in the description below for more modding goodness. They have lots of cool stuff going on over there, and none of this would have been possible without them. You can find the full music track over on Rosebud's channel too, as they also did a truly amazing job. Thanks for watching, and good luck against Zardy.